Progress, a train which brought a level of comfort to the rails of Victoria that no other state had seen before. A luxurious steam service from Melbourne to Albury, with a once grand service now reduced to a measly XPT in modern day. Dedication. The spirit of progress was introduced in November of 1937. It aimed to be the most luxurious service in the whole of Australia, which it most certainly achieved. The service culminated many preparatory projects that VR undertook to allow it to run, some of which were laying heavier rails on the North East line, the introduction of token signalling, which would allow trains to run non-stop, high-powered S-classes, check out my video on that, and testing of air-conditioned carriages. The mind behind this massive undertaking was VR Railway Commissioner Harold Clapp. He wanted to introduce a world-class service to Victoria, and wouldn't take anything less than perfection. No detail was overlooked, even testing the train's smoothness on curves by charging at them at full speed with a bowl of soup. If the soup spilled, the curves would be either changed or speed would be reduced. The name for the service was still up in the air. So, while in a conversation with his wife, Harold Clapp suggested the name Royal Victorian, inspired by the LMS service, the Royal Scot. And then, out of the blue, his wife blurted out, "Spirit of Progress." Design and innovation. When introduced in 1937, the streamlined S-classes would be the engine to hold the prestigious service. Back then, streamlining would be a new innovation to come to Australian rails, as well as other features of the service, such as air-conditioned carriages. The livery and design of the carriages also featured a stunning navy blue with bright yellow highlights, in an Art Deco design, very 30s. The interior also possessed high-quality materials such as stainless steel and native Australian blackwood veneer. The already stunning service was elevated by an onboard dining car, which included all the amenities of a high-class restaurant. Launch and regular service. After years of designing and preparation, the Spirit officially launched on the 15th of November 1937, with a wave of publicity following it, which included hundreds of videos and photos taken of it. A notable video taken was an Airco DH.4 aeroplane tailing the Spirit as it flew through the Victorian countryside, on its demonstration run to Geelong. At Spencer Street, a magnificent launch ceremony was held, with longtime Premier Albert Dunstan opening the parlour car with a shiny gold key. 300 guests were invited to join its inaugural run, ranging from all parts of wealth and power, such as former Attorney Generals, former ministers, and even a descendant of Edward Henty, the pioneer who S302, the engine hauling the train, was named after. The train made good time down the Geelong main line, flying down it at 119 km per hour. On the return journey, while storming through Werribee and Laverton, S302 achieved a new record for steam in Australia, going 127 km per hour, before speed was swiftly reduced to avoid an unprotected livestock crossing. Regular services sometimes even broke this speed, reaching as much as 138.4 km an hour, recorded using Flamand speed recorders. After smashing success at launch, the service would be a fast express service from Melbourne to Albury every day, with one intermediate stop at Seymour. This schedule would remain the same and relatively unchanged for 15 years. Trains would depart Spencer Street each night at 6:30 p.m. and arrive at Albury at 10:20, at an average of 80 km per hour, give or take. While cleaning out the carriages, staff would also turn the engine around at the Wodonga Triangle, to make sure the train was facing the correct direction for the return service. The amount of detail that was put into the service was astounding. The return service would depart at 7:55 the following morning and arrive at Spencer Street at 11:35, where the train would be turned using the North Melbourne Balloon Loop, and the cycle would continue the following day. After only a year of operation, patronage increased by 28,000, reaching over 209,000 users per annum. By 1939, patronage had increased yet again to 222,000 people. This number was about 1/5 of Melbourne's population at the time. Motive power and locomotives. The highly grand and powerful S-Class 462s would be the main engines assigned to the task of hauling the 11-car rake of coaches, 544 tons, over many kilometers and many 1 in 50 gradients. Check out my video on the S-Class. The typical consist for the service would be as follows: the leading S-Class, either S301 or S302, a guards van, classified as Cs, 4 second-class carriages, classified as BSs, a dining car, later named Murray, 4 first-class carriages, classified as As, and finally a parlour/observation car at the tail end, named Norman. An additional first-class carriage and bulk mail van, classified DS, were built. 1 second-class coach was removed to make way for the mail van, leaving 1 of each sitting carriage spare for both second and first class. From 1941 onwards, the Spirit was occasionally hauled by the largest engine on Victorian rails. Some would say it's overkill. It's H220. However, it was limited to a measly 100 kilometers per hour. Although it was superior on steep gradients, which compensated for its lacking speed. Conversion to diesel. As the S-classes weren't getting any younger, and the B-classes of 52 were just being rolled out, the logical step would be to replace the ever-aging S's with the brand new and elegant B-class diesel electrics. Which is exactly what happened. They quickly proved their superiority to steam traction, being much more reliable, much less costly to operate, and much more readily available than the limiting S's and the sole H. Following the roaring success of the trials, the B-classes fully displaced the S-classes on the Spirit of Progress as of April 1954. In 1956, several alterations to the consist were made. VR and NSWGR introduced a daylight service between Melbourne and Sydney, dubbing it the Intercapital Daylight, which meant the parlour car was moved from the Spirit and transferred to the new service, leaving the Spirit short 1 carriage. At around the same time, VR introduced the Z-Class saloon carriages, which are still remarkably in service, only supplementing the end sets though, and soon to be phased out. These saloon carriages would supplement the original 1937 carriages in the Spirit consist. Following 1957, a new brand spanking new set of diesel electrics were built to hold the Spirit. These were the S-classes, not to be confused with the steam engines. They had a similar appearance to the B-classes, but they weren't double-ended. The first 4 to arrive had the same numbers and names as the original steam engines, continuing their legacy on the Spirit. The train remained a staple of Victorian rails throughout the 50s. The train was so beloved that on the 21st anniversary of the Spirit, passengers enjoyed a 34-kilogram cake on the 23rd of November, 1958. Conversion to standard gauge. In 1962, conversion of the Melbourne to Albury corridor was complete. This meant trains and goods trains wouldn't have to change at a break of gauge town or stop such as Albury. This was a historic quirk ever since the North East Line was extended to Albury in 1881. This meant the Spirit could run non-stop to Sydney. which meant two consists had to be formed to run each night in opposite directions. Unfortunately for the 1937 stock, only one guards van of the original consist was converted to standard gauge. The rest was built in 1955 to 1962. In April of 1962, a celebration was held for the last broad gauge Spirit of Progress service, hauled by two veteran A2s, A2-995 and A2-996. These are some of the first express engines on VR. It was a dash from Seymour to Melbourne. On the same day, the inaugural run for standard gauge services also ran. A VR locomotive tore up the main line until Albury before NSWGR 3830 and 3813 took over and completed the run. On regular occasions, an NSW 42 class would run the service. The downfall. Unfortunately, in 1962, the Spirit's role as the leading express service on the Northeast Line was superseded by the all-new, shiny, and of course stainless steel Southern Aurora, which included all-new sleeper carriages. The Spirit would now stop at intermediate stops not served by the Aurora, such as Goulburn and Wangaratta, which is almost a regular stopping train, even being degraded to the point where one carriage would be detached at Goulburn and sent down to Canberra. Usually the coach would be coupled with a mixed train to be moved to Canberra. Unfortunately, the Spirit couldn't be considered a high-speed service anymore, as the journey time was a garbage 13 hours and 45 minutes, at an average of 33 kilometers per hour. It also couldn't be considered a streamliner service anymore, as after the X-Class was introduced in 1966, most services would be operated by them. Sleeping cars and powered vans would also appear in the consist, which would be fine if they were all in the same livery, which they weren't. All of this is a stark comparison to the 1937 Spirit of Progress, which would deliver a 3¼ hour service. Key features of the original Spirit of Progress were stripped away, such as the observation car and dining car, leaving the service a shell of its former self. Anyone who travelled on the service in the 40s and then travelled on it again 30 years later would see how appalling the service had become. Demise. With declining patronage ever since the 70s, mostly due to quality and air travel being cheaper, V-Line decided to merge the long-running Spirit of Progress and Southern Aurora into one service known as the Sydney to Melbourne Express, which would make the Spirit of Progress a thing of the past. The last Spirit of Progress service ran for the last time on the 2nd of August 1986, hauled by none other than S301 Sir Thomas Mitchell. Present day / preservation. Today, the service from Melbourne to Sydney is known as the New South Wales TransLink XPT, a much less grand name than the Spirit of Progress. However, a measure of how high standards on the Spirit were is the current day Melbourne XPT, even a full 86 years later, still only runs 20 minutes faster, which is astonishing, as back in those days, we didn't have this thing called diesel power. Much of the original rolling stock used on the Spirit was retained by VR for use on other long-distance services, such as the Overland and Vinelander, and for a time, West Coast Rail also used their rolling stock, until they collapsed in 2004. The last of the second-class BS compartment carriages were only retired by V-Line in July of 2006, a full 69 years after introduction. To be fair, the engineering behind locomotive carriages is relatively simple. With a set of 5 carriages returning into service after the spike in patronage, this set actually left service in 2010, or at 73 years old. Dreadfully, no S-Class steam locomotives survive into preservation. Fortunately, all S-Class diesels do, with all of them either being in storage or operational. And I'll go through that list with you right now. S300, Matthew Flinders, is under restoration at Canberra Railway Museum. S301, Sir Thomas Mitchell, is stored at Newport. S302, Edward Henty, is stored at North Bendigo Workshops, but was operational before suffering fire damage as of March 2022. Its engine has since been donated to B65. S303, CJ Latrobe, is fully operational and is allocated to the Seymour Heritage Centre. In 2007, a new Hume Highway Bridge was built over the Murray as part of the Albury Bypass project. The name for the bridge was none other than Spirit of Progress, to celebrate the legacy the service had on the town. Tours. There were many tours to commemorate the once grand train. However, two interesting ones are the 50th anniversary tour in 1987, where ARHS threw together a special service, complete with not the 1937 S-type carriages, as they were still in service under V-line operation, but instead the last of the air-conditioned blue and gold E-type carriages, hauled by R707 instead of the S-classes, as at this point they were 20 years dead. And of course, we can't forget the parlour car, Norman, which ironically was the only element from the original consist. To commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Spirit, VicTrack, the Department of Infrastructure, and the Victorian government funded the restoration of the remaining cars for use on the extravagant 70th celebration train. 8 out of the 11 carriages were assembled. Several carriages also had to be repainted into VR's absolutely stunning gold and blue livery. The carriages and locos to receive this treatment were a parlour car, a dining car, brake van 1CS, and diesel locomotives S303 and B74. Seymour Heritage Centre ran the service from Melbourne to Albury on the 25th of November 2007. The Spirit of Progress was once the most famous service in Victoria. Even today, its performance and luxury is mostly unmet by any other rail service in Victoria. Many traces of the Spirit still remain today, nearly 90 years later, and it forever has a lasting impression on the railways of Victoria.